The galaxy stretched out like a vast ocean, full of stars, planets, and civilizations beyond counting. For most races in the universe, this was normal, this was what they knew. Their charts mapped out the stars, guiding them through the dark void between worlds. Advanced species had traveled to the farthest reaches of space, creating empires and exploring new horizons. They had conquered the unknown. But there was one thing that no one talked about, one thing that was always left unspoken when the topic of space came up. The galactic chart stopped at the edge of human space. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was something far darker, something more frightening. No one had ever dared to explain why the chart ended there. The stars beyond were blank, as if the universe itself had simply forgotten that humanity existed. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it wasn't an accident at all. Maybe the map had been carefully crafted that way for a reason. The aliens knew. They all knew. Every species who had come to the galaxy's edge had whispered about it, but no one dared to ask. The last thing anyone wanted was to poke at the wound, to ask the question that might reveal the terrifying truth. What happens beyond human space? It had started with a quiet murmur, a rumor passed from one race to the next. At first, it had been dismissed. Humans were still too primitive, too disorganized to pose a real threat to the greater civilizations. But as the centuries passed, that dismissiveness started to change. Humans were everywhere, growing in number, expanding their borders. They had spread across the stars, never asking for permission, never bowing to anyone. And then came the Zatharians. They were a proud race, a terrifying race. The Zatharians had built their empire with fire and blood, conquering system after system. They didn't care about diplomacy. They didn't care about alliances. They cared about strength, about power, and about crushing anyone who stood in their way. Their ships were massive, their weapons unmatched, and their fleets were feared across the galaxy. The Zatharians looked at the map and saw that vast, empty space at the edge of human space. How curious, they thought. What could lie beyond? It was an oddity, a puzzle. They had heard the whispers, they knew the stories, the legends. They had even heard of the mysterious boundary, that strange place where the map simply ended. But they were the Zatharians. They were powerful. No one had ever stopped them before. Surely, whatever lay beyond the human territories was just another weak species, too scared to defend itself. So they decided to push. They decided to cross that line. With a fleet of battle-hardened ships, the Zatharians began their journey toward the edge of human space. They brought their warships, their destroyers, and their superweapons. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to conquer. The humans, for their part, were unprepared. They hadn't seen it coming. For years, they had been focused on their own affairs, dealing with their petty squabbles and internal issues. They weren't interested in galactic politics. They didn't care about the grand empires that ruled the stars, but they cared about their freedom. They cared about their families. They cared about survival. When the Zatharians appeared in Earth's skies, their ships blotting out the sun, the humans didn't panic. At least not immediately. There were no formal declarations of war, no elaborate speeches. Instead, humanity did what it always did when faced with a crisis. They adapted. They reacted. They survived. The first message the Zatharians sent was simple, straightforward. It was broadcast across all frequencies, a chilling tone vibrating through the void of space. Surrender, humans. This is your last chance. The humans didn't respond at first. The message was broadcast again and again, a third time. By the time the Zatharians gave humanity their final demand, 3 days to submit or face destruction, something inside the human spirit stirred. 3 days. 3 days to surrender. 3 days to give up everything they had fought for, everything they had worked for. They could have bowed, could have pleaded for mercy, but the humans didn't. They didn't have to. What the Zatharians didn't know was that the boundary they had crossed was not just a line on a map. It was a symbol, a line drawn in the sand by generations of human resilience, of people who had survived against impossible odds. The line wasn't just a border on a chart. It was the last warning. Humanity wasn't just a species among others. It was a force that had been underestimated by the galaxy's mightiest powers for too long. The message humanity sent back wasn't complicated. It wasn't a grand speech. It was simple. We don't surrender. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It was a promise. And when the Zatharians realized the truth, that humanity would never back down, never kneel, they made their first mistake. They didn't understand what they had truly provoked. They thought they were facing just another species, another weak, scared race that would submit the moment they saw a fleet. But they were wrong. Because when the Zatharians came, they didn't just face the humans. They faced the entire history of human defiance, a legacy that stretched back to the dawn of civilization. They faced the unyielding, stubborn, unshakable truth of what it meant to be human. And the galaxy would never be the same again. When the Zatharians arrived, they expected the humans to crumble. They expected them to bow, to plead for mercy, to surrender without a fight. After all, humanity wasn't supposed to be a threat. They were still so young, so primitive in comparison to the ancient, powerful races that ruled the galaxy. But what the Zatharians didn't know was that humanity had something the other civilizations lacked, a fire that burned in their souls, a defiance that couldn't be extinguished. The first sign of trouble came on the third day, as promised. The Zatharians' ships, dark and imposing, filled the skies above Earth. Massive destroyers and battleships, all bristling with weapons, hovered ominously in space. The humans could only watch in shock as the shadow of war descended on them. And yet no one panicked. No one screamed. It wasn't that humanity didn't fear the Zatharians, it was that, after centuries of war, hardship, and survival, they had learned how to face their fears and fight back. In the face of overwhelming odds, humans didn't collapse, they stood taller. The first message from the Zatharians had been a warning. The second was a demand. Surrender, or we will destroy your cities, burn your world to the ground. That's when humanity made its first move. The call went out from every corner of Earth, every colony on the outer rim. Governments, leaders, military commanders, and ordinary people all knew what they had to do. The time for hiding was over. The time for fear was done. Humanity would not surrender. They would fight. In the cities, people rallied. In underground bunkers and military bases, plans were drawn up. The humans didn't have massive fleets or advanced weapons like the Zatharians, but they had something more important. They had determination, and they knew how to make do with what they had. Sarah Briggs, a former Navy captain who had been retired for years, was called back into service. Her once quiet life had been shattered in an instant. The humans had no choice but to fight back, and she was the one they turned to. A veteran of countless skirmishes and battles, Sarah knew the Zatharians were a force to be reckoned with, but she also knew that humanity's greatest strength was its resourcefulness. The humans had never been good at following the rules. They had always fought dirty when they had to. Sarah didn't waste time with speeches or formalities. She gathered a small group of volunteers, a handful of military officers, engineers, and former soldiers, and began to plan. They would use old technology, scrap parts, and whatever they could scrounge up. If they couldn't beat the Zatharians with strength, they would do it with guile. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Zatharians grew impatient. Their fleet was large, far larger than anything humanity had, but they were used to facing races that bowed to them. The Zatharians couldn't understand why the humans hadn't submitted yet. What was taking them so long? They sent more threats, more demands. But every time the humans responded the same way. No. On the third day of the invasion, Sarah and her team launched their counterattack. They took a fleet of hastily modified civilian ships, armed with whatever weapons they could fit onto them, and charged into the heart of the Zatharian fleet. The battle that followed was chaotic. The Zatharians, used to overwhelming firepower, were caught off guard by the humans' unpredictability. Human ships, patched together with duct tape and old materials, zoomed in and out of the larger Zatharian ships, launching makeshift missiles and bombs. They didn't have advanced targeting systems or shields, but they had speed, they had surprise, and most importantly, they had courage. Sarah's ship, the Ulysses, was a patchwork of old military tech, stolen parts, and salvaged weapons. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As the Zatharians closed in, Sarah gave the order. Her ship fired everything they had. A massive explosion tore through a Zatharian cruiser, sending it spiraling into the void. The humans cheered, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. The Zatharians retaliated with everything they had. Beams of deadly energy sliced through the air, cutting through the human ships with terrifying precision. The Ulysses shook as it took several direct hits, but Sarah's crew didn't falter. They fought harder, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. But the Zatharians had underestimated the humans in the worst way. They had thought they could crush them easily. Instead, they found themselves caught in a trap. Sarah and her team had set it up perfectly. They had lured the Zatharians into a pocket of space where they had hidden a dozen old warships, ships that hadn't been used in decades. They were slow, outdated, and rusted, but they had one thing going for them. They were armed to the teeth. With a series of well-timed maneuvers, the humans launched a coordinated attack. The Zatharians were caught off guard again, this time by a new wave of human ships, emerging from the shadows of space, firing with reckless abandon. The human ships didn't care about finesse or strategy. They just wanted to hurt. The Zatharians tried to regroup, but it was too late. The damage was done. The humans had made it clear that they weren't going to go down without a fight. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah caught a glimpse of the Zatharian flagship, the enormous warship that commanded the entire fleet. She set her course. She knew what had to be done. As the Ulysses flew toward the flagship, missiles flying, engines roaring, Sarah gave one final order. "We're going to make them regret coming here." And with that, humanity had fired the first shot of their war, not just for survival, but for revenge. The Zatharians had always been confident. They had crushed civilizations far older and more advanced than humanity. To them, Earth was just another rock in space, just another target to be destroyed. But as the battle raged on, something changed. The Zatharians, once so sure of their victory, began to feel something they had never experienced before: doubt. The humans, with their crude ships and makeshift weapons, were not just surviving. They were fighting back. Every time the Zatharians thought they had them cornered, humanity found a way to strike, to survive, to make their presence felt in the most painful way possible. The Zatharian flagship, Vengeance, loomed above Earth, its enormous shadow casting a chill over the planet below. The humans had tried to take it down, tried to break through its defenses, but it was a nearly invulnerable fortress. The flagship was surrounded by a dozen other ships, each bristling with weapons, each one more powerful than anything the humans had ever faced. It seemed hopeless. But humanity had never been one to give up easily, and now they had something to fight for. Earth was their home, the only home they knew. It wasn't just a planet to them, it was everything. Every person who had ever lived there, every dream, every hope, all of it was at stake. Sarah Briggs, now fully in command of the human resistance, stood on the bridge of the Ulysses, her mind racing. Her ship had taken heavy damage and many of her crew had been lost. The battle was grinding on and every passing minute felt like a lifetime. The Zatharians were relentless, but Sarah's heart was full of resolve. She wasn't about to let them take her home. She wasn't about to let them win. "We need a plan," her second-in-command, Lieutenant Mara Carter, said, her voice tight with tension. "We can't keep going like this. They'll wipe us out." Sarah's jaw clenched. She knew the stakes. She knew the risk. "I'm not ready to give up yet." The room fell silent as Sarah paced back and forth. She watched the screens, the constant battle unfolding before her eyes. She could see the Zatharians advancing, their ships slowly closing in. Her crew was running low on ammo, their ships were barely holding together, and the odds were growing slimmer by the second. The Zatharians had underestimated them, yes, but now they were beginning to understand just how far humanity would go to protect what was theirs. "You said you wanted a plan," Sarah finally said, her voice firm. "Here, what we're going to do, we're going to hit them where it hurts. We're going to take out their command ship, Vengeance." Mara looked at her in disbelief. "You want us to take out their flagship? Are you crazy? We're outgunned, outmanned." "I know," Sarah said, her eyes hard, "but we don't have any other choice. If we don't take down Vengeance, they'll destroy us all. It's their command center. We take it out and we break their whole fleet." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. The plan sounded insane, impossible even, but the fire in Sarah's eyes was undeniable. She believed in it. And when Sarah Briggs believed in something, the crew followed. "We'll need a diversion," Sarah continued. "We'll pull them out of position. The rest of the fleet will create chaos, draw their attention. That's when we'll make our move, fast and hard, no hesitation." Mara's face softened. "If we do this, we're going to lose more people." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I'm willing to lose everything to protect Earth, and I know you are too." The crew nodded. There was no more room for fear now, only the cold certainty of what had to be done. They were going to take the fight to the heart of the Zatharian fleet, even if it meant they didn't make it back. The final charge began at dusk. Humanity's remaining ships, battered but determined, launched toward the Zatharian fleet. The Zatharians were caught off guard by the sheer boldness of the humans' attack. They had expected humanity to retreat, to run. But instead, the humans hit them head-on, with everything they had left. In the chaos, Sarah and the Ulysses broke through, her ship leading the charge straight toward the Vengeance. The Zatharians didn't know what hit them. It was all happening too fast, too fiercely. For every ship that fell, for every human fighter that was lost, the Zatharians' grip on Earth weakened. The Ulysses took heavy fire. Sarah felt the ship shudder as a barrage of plasma fire ripped through its hull. Sparks flew, alarms blared, but Sarah's hands never left the controls. Her crew was counting on her. "Hold it together," she shouted, her voice steady. "We're not done yet." With a final push, they reached the Vengeance. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as the massive Zatharian warship loomed ahead. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. But in that moment, it wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of everything humanity stood against. And Sarah was going to make sure it would never threaten her world again. "Fire everything," Sarah ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. The Ulysses unleashed everything it had. Missiles, railgun rounds, and the last of their precious energy reserves fired at the Zatharian flagship. The massive ship rocked under the barrage, its shields flickering. But the humans didn't stop. They kept pushing, kept fighting. They knew that this was the only chance they would get. It was a desperate, suicidal gamble, but Sarah knew that they couldn't win this war with anything less. And then, in the moment of unimaginable tension, it happened. The Zatharian flagship Vengeance exploded in a flash of light. The shockwave rocked the Ulysses, throwing Sarah to the ground. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, the communications channel crackled to life. The Zatharians were retreating. The fight was far from over, but the humans had dealt the fatal blow. The Zatharian fleet was broken, and Earth was safe, for now. The victory was bittersweet. They had lost so many, and yet they had won. In that moment, Sarah Briggs allowed herself one brief, fleeting smile. The humans had done it. They had defied the odds. And in that instant, the Zatharians knew. They had made a terrible mistake. The humans weren't just another species in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would never forget it. The silence after the battle was deafening. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before the survivors of humanity's last stand. The remains of the Zatharian fleet were scattered across the stars, a testament to the cost of the war. The victory had been hard won, but at what price? Sarah Briggs stood on the bridge of the Ulysses, her eyes locked on the stars ahead. Her mind was numb, her body exhausted, but there was no time to rest. The cost of the battle had been too great. Nearly half of Earth's remaining fleet had been destroyed, and so many lives had been lost in the chaos. The feeling of triumph was mixed with the weight of their sacrifices. "We did it," Mara Carter said quietly from behind her, her voice full of awe. "We actually did it. The Zatharians are gone. Earth is safe." But Sarah couldn't bring herself to celebrate. The truth was, their survival didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. "Not all of them," Sarah murmured, her voice distant. Mara frowned. "What do you mean? The Zatharians are retreating. We've broken their fleet." Sarah's gaze turned back toward the empty expanse. "It's over for the Zatharians, yes, but not for everyone." There was something in her tone that made Mara pause. "What are you talking about?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the observation window and looked out at the wreckage of the Zatharian ships drifting in the vastness of space. Her mind raced through the events that had led them to this point. The betrayal, the broken trust, her father. Marcus Briggs. For years she had believed he was dead. She had accepted his disappearance as just another casualty of war. But then the Zatharians had used his name. And now she knew the truth. Her father hadn't died. He had joined them. He had betrayed humanity for reasons that still haunted her. "Captain," Mara's voice broke through her thoughts. "You know we won. The Ulysses is still standing. The humans, our people, are still alive. That's the victory we need to focus on." Sarah's hand gripped the railing tightly. She wanted to believe that. She wanted to accept that this was over, that they had won. But her mind kept returning to the same question. Why? Why had her father betrayed them all? What had he become? "I'm not so sure it's over," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The Zatharians are retreating, but someone's still pulling the strings, someone powerful." Mara's eyes widened. "You think he's still out there, that he is part of this?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I don't know what he's planning, but I know this. The Zatharians were just the beginning. Whoever is behind them, whoever controls the war, is still out there." Mara looked down at her feet, thinking, "Then we have to be ready." Sarah's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: rage, sadness, betrayal. Her father, the man she had once looked up to, the man who had taught her how to fight, how to survive, had turned his back on everything he once stood for. The anger inside her was a fire that burned with each passing moment. But there was something more, something she couldn't put into words. A deep, gnawing emptiness in her chest. "You're right," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "We can't stop now, not when there's still a threat out there. We won the battle, but the war isn't over." The crew stood in quiet agreement. They had fought for Earth, for their families, for their future. But there was still a long road ahead. The war, though won in space, had left a deep scar, and Sarah knew that her fight wasn't over until she knew why her father had made the choice he did. In the days that followed, the human fleet slowly began to regroup. The survivors returned to Earth, battered and broken, but they returned. Their homes, though scarred by the war, were still standing. People began to rebuild, though the shadows of loss would linger for a long time. But as the dust settled, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Zatharians might be retreating, but their defeat hadn't answered the most important question of all: what had truly happened to her father? She called a meeting with the top commanders of the remaining human forces. The Ulysses was docked, but she hadn't been able to rest. She was determined to find the truth. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "We've won the battle. We've pushed the Zatharians back. But I know deep down that this isn't the end. Someone pulled their strings, and that someone is still out there. We need to figure out who they are." Commander Lucas Ree, a veteran of many battles, leaned forward. "You're saying we haven't seen the last of the Zatharians?" Sarah nodded. "No, I'm saying there's more at play here than just an alien invasion. This war has never been about just Earth. We've been pawns in a much bigger game, and I intend to find out who's playing it." The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. Sarah's eyes scanned the faces of the men and women who had fought by her side. They had seen the horrors of the battle, felt the loss of comrades, and tasted the bitterness of victory. But they knew what Sarah knew. This wasn't just about winning anymore. This was about understanding why they were dragged into this war and who or what had driven it. As she looked at the faces of her crew, Sarah felt a fire spark in her chest. They had fought hard. They had survived the impossible, and they weren't done yet. "We're going to find out who's behind all of this," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "And when we do, we'll make them pay for everything they've done." The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. Humanity had survived the Zatharians, but now they had to survive the truth. And Sarah Briggs was ready to fight, this time not just for Earth, but for the answers she so desperately needed. Because if there was one thing humanity had learned, it was that they would never stop fighting, never stop searching, and no one, not even their enemies, could stand in their way. The days that followed the destruction of the Zatharian fleet were a blur of activity. Humanity had won. There was no denying that. The Zatharians were retreating, their once proud empire crumbling in the wake of the human resistance, but victory had come at a heavy price. Sarah Briggs, her heart still heavy with the loss of so many, knew that the battle for Earth was far from over. Her crew, though victorious, was exhausted. Many were injured, their bodies battered and broken from days of unrelenting fighting. The shipyards were full of damaged vessels, and Earth's cities were filled with mourning families, each one carrying their own personal loss. But there was one thing Sarah couldn't shake, the thought of her father. Marcus Briggs, the man who had once been a hero, had turned his back on everything humanity had fought for. The Zatharians had used his name to manipulate her, to break her. Sarah had never imagined her father would be part of the destruction, let alone working alongside the very enemies they had been fighting. "I can't stop thinking about him," Sarah admitted one evening, sitting in the quiet command room of the Ulysses. The lights of the bridge flickered dimly, and the crew had long since gone to rest. Mara Carter, her second in command, sat beside her, her eyes filled with understanding. "You need to let it go," Mara said gently. "He made his choice. He's with the Zatharians now." "I know," Sarah replied softly, "but I can't help feeling like I didn't see it coming. I trusted him. I believed in him." She paused, her fists clenched at her sides. "I need to know why he chose this, why he betrayed us." Mara was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You've already fought for Earth. You've already saved us all. What more do you need to do?" Sarah's eyes, full of determination, locked onto Mara's. "I need to understand. I can't move forward until I know the truth. What made him turn his back on everything we stand for? Was he forced? Did he change? I have to know. I have to face it." Mara didn't say anything more. She understood Sarah's pain. The weight of betrayal wasn't something anyone could easily forget, especially when it came from someone you had loved and looked up to. Over the next few days, Sarah focused on rebuilding. The human fleet was in shambles, and the planet itself needed time to recover. But the question of her father gnawed at her. She knew there were more answers to uncover, more truths hidden in the shadows. She couldn't leave it alone, not when her father's betrayal had haunted her for so long. Then came the message. It wasn't from the Zatharians, but from a source that Sarah didn't recognize. The message was brief, encrypted, and addressed directly to her. It appeared in the middle of the night, its transmission cutting through the quiet of the Ulysses bridge like a sharp blade. The message read, "If you want answers, you will find them. Come to the coordinates I've provided. There is much to discuss." No name, no signature, just coordinates. At first, Sarah hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to walk into another trap, to be used by the same forces that had nearly destroyed everything she held dear. But her gut told her this was more than just a threat. This was a chance to finally understand why her father had done what he did. "I'm going," Sarah said, her voice resolute. She stood up, her body aching but her heart steeled with purpose. "Prepare the ship. We leave in an hour." Mara looked at her, concern written on her face. "You don't know who sent this message, Sarah. It could be a trick." "I know," Sarah said, her voice firm, "but it's the only lead I've got. I need to see it through." With that, they set course for the coordinates, a small, remote system far from Earth's defenses. As the Ulysses left the safety of Earth's orbit and jumped into hyperspace, Sarah's mind raced. Could this be a trap? Was someone still pulling strings from the shadows? Or was it truly a message from her father or someone who knew him? The ship emerged from hyperspace, and before them lay a forgotten world, one that had been abandoned by time. The coordinates led to an old, derelict space station orbiting a barren planet, its once glorious structure now rusted and decaying. It was an eerie sight, a place untouched for centuries. "We're here," Sarah said, her voice heavy with anticipation. "Now we find out what's really going on." As the Ulysses approached, a transmission came through. It was the same voice from the message, but now it was clear, unmistakable. "Sarah," the voice said, cold and calm, "I knew you would come." Her heart skipped a beat. It was him. It was her father. "Dad," her voice faltered, a mixture of disbelief and anger twisting in her chest. Why did you do this? You betrayed us." The voice on the other end was emotionless. "I did what was necessary. The galaxy isn't black and white, Sarah. You don't understand the bigger picture. I did what I had to do to ensure humanity's future. By aligning with the Zatharians, by helping them destroy Earth, you can't justify this." The voice grew softer, almost regretful. "I don't expect you to understand, but I couldn't tell you, I couldn't warn you, they would have killed you, or worse." Sarah clenched her fists, her eyes burning with fury. "I don't care what you say, Dad. You made your choice. You sided with them." There was silence for a moment, and then her father spoke again, his voice heavy with finality. "I made my choice, Sarah, and now you have to make yours. The Zatharians are only the beginning. The real war is coming. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but you're too young to understand." The transmission cut off. Sarah stood there, stunned. Her father, the man she had loved and admired, had made a choice, one that would haunt her forever. She had hoped for answers, but now that she had them, she didn't know how to feel. She looked at Mara, her heart torn. "The war's not over, is it?" Mara shook her head. "No, it's just beginning." And as Sarah stared into the cold, empty void of space, she knew one thing for sure. The fight for humanity's future was far from over. It wasn't just about surviving the Zatharians anymore. It was about the fight for everything they had ever believed in.